There is a 120-mile stretch of U.S. Highway 60 through the Texas Hill Country, where the road kills people with such regularity that the truckers who drive it for a living have developed an informal rule. You do not drive it after dark. Not a law, not a posted restriction, not something any transportation authority will admit is necessary. Just a rule, passed mouth to ear in truck stops and over CB radios for 40 years, that has probably saved more lives than any guardrail the state of Texas ever installed. The question is why the state never made it official. The road itself. Let me tell you what US 60 looks like in the daytime, because the daytime version of this road is genuinely beautiful, and I think that's part of what makes it so dangerous. It runs roughly east to west across the Edwards Plateau, which is what geologists call the raised limestone shelf that most Texans just call the hill country. The plateau sits between 600 and 2,300 feet above sea level, depending on where you are, and the road climbs and falls across it in long, sweeping grades that give you the feeling of flying just slightly above the earth. The cedar and live oak grow right to the shoulder in places. The limestone cuts that the highway department blasted through in the 1950s and 60s rise on either side like pale yellow walls. In the morning, when the light comes in low from the east, those walls glow almost amber. In the afternoon, when the thunderheads build over the plateau and the light goes green and strange, the road looks like a painting someone made of Texas before they'd ever actually been there. In the daytime, this road looks like something you'd want to drive. That's the daytime. The stretch that matters runs from Junction, Texas in the west to Fredericksburg in the east. 120 miles, give or take, through Kimball County into Kerr County, across the Guadalupe River Valley, up through the Cedar Breaks above Kerrville, and finally down into the German Hill Country around Fredericksburg, where the peach orchards start and the tourists from San Antonio come on weekends to buy wine and feel like they've left civilization. It passes through 3 counties, 6 or 7 small communities, depending on how generously you define the word community, and exactly 1 incorporated city of any size, which is Kerrville, population roughly 23,000. Between Junction and Kerrville, roughly 70 miles of that 120, there are stretches where you will not pass another car for 15 minutes at 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. At 2 in the morning on a Tuesday in January, you can go longer than that. The road is 2 lanes for most of its length. There are passing lanes in a few places cut into the uphill grades where the state finally admitted that being stuck behind a loaded livestock trailer doing 42 miles per hour up a 6% grade was creating its own category of danger. The shoulder ranges from adequate to non-existent. In the limestone cut sections, there is no shoulder at all. The white line is the edge of the world. Beyond it is the rock face on one side and a drop on the other, and neither one is forgiving at highway speed. There are deer on this road, enormous numbers of deer. The hill country has one of the highest white-tailed deer densities in North America. Wildlife biologists estimate somewhere between 1 and 2 deer per acre across parts of the Edwards Plateau. Per acre, think about that for a moment while I let it sink in. 1 to 2 deer per acre in a landscape where the road cuts straight through the middle of their territory at a time of year when they are most active, at a time of day when they cannot be seen until they are already in front of you. That's the daytime version of the problem. Now turn off the lights. The engineering nobody talks about, US Highway 60 through the hill country, was not designed by anyone who expected it to carry the traffic it carries today, and that is not a small detail. It is the central mechanical fact of everything that follows. The original paved route through this corridor was established in the 1930s, and the standards of that era were built around vehicles that weighed a fraction of what modern semi-trucks weigh and traveled at speeds that topped out well below what the posted limit is today. When the Texas Highway Department, which became TXDOT in 1991, went back through in the 50s and 60s and widened and realigned sections of the road, they were working with what the terrain gave them and a budget that didn't leave room for sentiment about geometry. Here's what that means in practice. The curve radii on several sections of this road, the mathematical description of how sharply a road bends, were calculated for vehicles doing 50 to 55 miles per hour. The posted speed limit is 70, has been 70 since Texas removed its daytime speed limits entirely in 1997, a decision that, and I say this with all due respect to the Lone Star State, was either very brave or very optimistic, depending on which side of the guardrail you end up on. A loaded 18-wheeler, the kind hauling cattle from the ranches around Junction to the feedlots and processing facilities to the east, can weigh up to 80,000 pounds at legal limit. Some of them are heavier. The kinetic energy of 80,000 pounds traveling at 65 miles per hour, which is a conservative estimate of highway speed on this corridor, is a number that engineers express in ways that don't translate well into plain English, but the plain English version is this. When something that heavy hits something that isn't moving, the outcome is determined before the brakes are applied. The grade changes are the other piece. This road climbs and descends repeatedly across the plateau, and several of the descents are long enough and steep enough that a fully loaded truck needs to downshift well before the bottom or risk losing braking capability. There are runaway truck ramps on some of the grades, the gravel-filled escape routes that you see on mountain highways, designed for trucks whose brakes have failed on the descent. The existence of a runaway truck ramp on a Texas hill country highway is not a reassuring sight. In 1993, a Texas Department of Transportation internal study of the Junction to Fredericksburg corridor identified 11 specific locations where the combination of curved geometry, grade, and limited sight distance created what the report called non-standard conditions relative to the posted speed limit. Non-standard conditions, that's the technical phrase. What it means is that the road bends more sharply than it should for how fast you're allowed to drive on it. 11 places in 120 miles where the math doesn't work. The report recommended speed reductions at 3 of the 11 locations, additional signage at 4 more, and a geometric study of the remaining 4. It was filed. Some of the signs went up, the speed reductions did not happen, the geometric study was apparently never completed, or if it was not included in any subsequent public documentation that anyone I spoke to was able to locate. The signs are still there, yellow diamonds with numbers in them. Advisory speed 35, advisory speed 45, advisory speed, and this is my personal favorite, advisory speed 50 on a road where the posted limit is 70. Advisory means suggested. It means the number is not the law. It means you can ignore it. People ignore it. The accidents that changed everything. On November 14th, 2003, a Peterbilt semi hauling a double-drop flatbed loaded with oilfield equipment westbound on US 60 ran off the road approximately 11 miles east of Junction at 11:47 in the evening. The truck went through a guardrail at a curve that the 1993 TXDOT study had flagged, dropped approximately 40 feet into a dry creek bed, and caught fire. The driver, a 38-year-old man from Odessa named Curtis Dale Whitfield, did not survive. The accident report, filed by the Kimball County Sheriff's Office, listed the cause as failure to negotiate a curve. Speed was listed as a contributing factor. The posted limit at that location was 70 miles per hour. The advisory speed on the yellow diamond before the curve read 40 miles per hour. The gap between those two numbers is where Curtis Whitfield died. That is one accident, one name, one night. Between 1995 and 2015, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration's fatal accident reporting system recorded 47 fatal crashes on this 120-mile corridor. 47. That's an average of one fatal crash every 5.5 months for 20 years on a road that most people outside of Texas have never heard of. For context, the fatality rate per mile on this stretch of US 60 during that period was approximately 3 times the national average for rural 2-lane highways, not double. 3 times. 29 of those 47 fatal crashes occurred between the hours of 9 in the evening and 6 in the morning. 29 out of 47, which is 62% of fatal crashes on a road that carries roughly the same traffic at 2 in the morning as it does at 2 in the afternoon. The road does not get busier at night. The road gets much, much more dangerous at night. 11 of those 29 nighttime fatalities involved commercial vehicles. Trucks. The kind of trucks driven by professionals who know this road, who have driven roads like this all over the country, who are trained and licensed and regulated, and still, on 11 separate occasions over 20 years, did not make it to the end of their shift. The deer account for some of it. A deer strike at highway speed in a passenger vehicle is a survivable accident more often than not. A deer strike at highway speed in a loaded semi where the animal goes under the front axle instead of over the hood can cause a loss of control that has nothing to do with driver error and everything to do with the weight of the vehicle and the geometry of the road when the vehicle begins to drift. But deer don't explain all of it. Fatigue explains some of it. The hill country is a long haul. Drivers coming out of Junction have often already been on the road for hours working toward the federal limit of 11 hours of driving time in a 14-hour window. By the time they hit the eastern grades above Kerrville at midnight, some of them are in the gray zone where reflexes slow and the road starts to blur at the edges. The road explains the rest. The truckers. If you want to understand what truckers know about US 60 that the rest of us don't, you have to spend some time in the truck stops at either end of the corridor. There's a Flying J in Junction, or there was the last time I checked. There are fuel stops in Kerrville, and in those places, over bad coffee and under fluorescent lights, you can have conversations that don't happen anywhere else. I want to be careful here because I'm going to describe something informal. There is no union rule about this road. There is no company policy that I've been able to document that specifically prohibits nighttime driving on US 60 through the hill country. What there is knowledge. Drivers who work the Texas corridor, the routes that run cattle and equipment and produce and oil field supply between the western ranches and the eastern processing centers and the Gulf Coast ports, they share information the way people in dangerous professions always share information, not through official channels, through repetition, through the accumulation of stories that all end the same way. The phrase that comes up in conversations and in trucker forums online and in the kind of documentation that gets filed in wrongful death suits and then buried in court records is the phrase local knowledge. Local knowledge is what you have after you've driven a road enough times to know where the deer come out of the cedar, which curves the advisory signs are serious about, and which ones are just the state covering itself legally. Where the road surface gets slick before the rest of the road gets slick because there's a seep coming through the limestone underneath that you can't see, just feel. Local knowledge on US 60 says don't drive it after dark if you can avoid it. And if you can't avoid it, slow down to a speed that feels embarrassingly slow, and then slow down some more. And if you're coming down the grade east of Junction in the dark with a full load and the truck starts to push, find a gear and find it now, not in 30 seconds, now. That knowledge is real. It has been tested against the road repeatedly, and the road has confirmed it repeatedly. The truckers who drive this corridor regularly are not superstitious people. They are professionals who make risk calculations for a living. When professionals who make risk calculations for a living decide that a specific piece of road is not worth the risk after dark, that is not folklore. That is a data point. The CB radio culture that carried this kind of information through the 1970s and 80s, the Channel 19 conversations where you get a heads up about a bad stretch from a driver coming the other way, that culture is largely gone. The CB still exists, but it's thinner. What replaced it partially is the internet, the forums and the Facebook groups and the subreddits where drivers compare notes. And on those platforms, US 60 through the hill country comes up. Not constantly, not dramatically, but with the steady, matter-of-fact frequency of a road that professionals have categorized. There's a post from a driver in 2019 that I keep coming back to. He'd been driving the Texas run for 11 years. He wrote, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't reproduce other people's words, that he had driven US 60 at night exactly once in 11 years, and that once was enough to decide. He'd come around a curve east of London, Texas, which is a small community about midway through the corridor that I promise actually exists, and there were two deer standing in his lane. He'd had enough room and enough reflexes to get around them. The driver behind him in a passenger pickup had not. He wrote that he stopped and waited for the ambulance. He didn't say anything else about it. He didn't need to. What the state knows. In 2008, the Texas Department of Transportation completed a corridor study of US Highway 60 between Junction and Fredericksburg as part of a broader statewide safety initiative funded through the Federal Safe, Accountable, Flexible, Efficient Transportation Equity Act, which is a name that only a government agency could love. The study found what the 1993 study had found, with 15 more years of crash data to make the point more firmly. Elevated fatality rate. Non-standard geometry at multiple locations, deer vehicle conflict hotspots that correlated almost perfectly with the crash locations in the fatality data, insufficient passing opportunities creating risk behavior as impatient drivers attempted to pass slow-moving vehicles in locations where passing was not safe. The study recommended a package of improvements: curve realignment at 4 locations, extended passing lanes at 3 locations, deer warning systems, the kind that use sensors to detect animal movement near the road, and flash warning lights at 7 high conflict zones. Improved lighting at the intersection of US Highway 60 and Texas State Highway 27 near Ingram, which had generated a disproportionate number of crashes on its own. The estimated cost of the full package was $62 million. $62 million is a lot of money. It is also, for context, approximately what Texas spends on highway construction and maintenance every 4 days. The state's transportation budget in 2008 was approximately $5.8 billion. The improvements recommended for this corridor would have consumed slightly over 1% of 1 month's budget. They were not funded. Some of them were partially funded. Signage was improved. A passing lane was extended near Kerrville. The deer warning systems were not installed. The curve realignments were not done. The intersection at Ingram got a flashing yellow beacon, which is better than nothing and considerably worse than a traffic signal. I want to be fair to the Texas Department of Transportation here because I don't think this is a story about villains. Transportation departments across the country make these calculations constantly. Every road has problems. Every problem has a cost. The money is finite and the needs are not. Somewhere in Austin, a traffic engineer looked at $62 million and looked at every other project competing for the same pool of money: bridges that were structurally deficient, urban interchanges that were generating 10 times the fatality rate per mile, school zones without sidewalks, and made a calculation. The calculation was not that the lives lost on US Highway 60 don't matter. The calculation was that the same money saved more lives somewhere else. That may even be true. It doesn't make it easier to explain to Curtis Whitfield's family in Odessa. The town at East End Junction, Texas, has a population of approximately 2,500 people. It sits at the confluence of the North and South Llano Rivers, which is actually where it gets its name, and which is one of those geographical facts that seems obvious, once you know it and somehow never occurred to you before. The rivers are beautiful, the town is small, its economy runs on ranching, hunting leases, and the traffic that passes through on US 60 and Interstate 10, which cross here before separating again, 60 heading northeast toward Fredericksburg and 10 continuing east towards San Antonio. There is a woman named Patsy who has worked the counter at a convenience store on the junction end of the corridor for, by her own account, about 22 years. I am not going to give you her last name because I did not ask if I could. She has seen things. She told me in the way that people who have watched the same thing happen repeatedly talk about it, with a flatness that is not indifference, but is the tone that replaces shock after shock has worn itself out, that she can tell which drivers are about to make a mistake. They pull in for fuel in the early evening, she says, already tired from wherever they came from, and they look at the map or the GPS and they calculate that they can make Kerrville or Fredericksburg before midnight if they push. And she can see the calculation happening, and sometimes she says something and sometimes she does not, because she is not their mother and people make their own choices. The tow truck situation in Kimball County is its own story. There are a limited number of wreckers rated to handle heavy commercial vehicles within any reasonable distance of the corridor. When a semi goes off the road at night, the response time for a heavy wrecker can run to 90 minutes, 2 hours, longer if the truck is in a creek bed and requires specialized equipment. The Highway Patrol handles traffic control. The volunteer fire department, because there is no paid fire department in most of this county, handles the extrication and the fire suppression. When there is a fire, the volunteers have names and jobs and families. They are ranchers and insurance agents, and the guy who runs the hardware store. They have pagers that go off at 2 a.m. and they get up and put on the gear and drive to whatever the road has done this time. One of them, a man who has been volunteering for over a decade and asked that I not use his name, told me that the calls he remembers are not the dramatic ones. He said the dramatic ones you process because there is something to do. The ones he remembers are the ones where he arrives and there is nothing left to do, where the only job is to stand in the road with a flashlight and redirect traffic around something that used to be a truck and is now a problem for the county medical examiner. He said those calls happen at night. He said in his time with the department, he could not recall a fatal commercial vehicle crash on this corridor that happened between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. He said that might just be his memory, that he might be wrong about that. He said he did not think he was wrong. Why? It is still open. Here is the part of the story that I find genuinely difficult to resolve, and I want to be honest about that, because I think the easy version of this story is a story about negligence, about a government that knows a road is killing people and does nothing. And I don't think that's quite what's happening here. US Highway 60 through the hill country is open because closing it or restricting it would impose costs that are not abstract. The ranches west of Junction that ship cattle east depend on this road. There is no good alternative route. Interstate 10 is accessible, but it adds miles and time. And in the commercial trucking world, miles and time are money, and money determines whether a small ranching operation stays viable or doesn't. The agricultural economy of Kimball County and the Western Hill Country runs in part on the ability to move product east efficiently, and US Highway 60 is the efficient route. A nighttime restriction, the kind that would formalize what the truckers already practice informally, would require enforcement. Enforcement requires troopers. The Texas Highway Patrol is not understaffed in the way that makes headlines, but it is spread thin across an enormous state. And a rural corridor in the hill country is not where you concentrate your resources if you are trying to maximize public safety per dollar spent. There's also the question of what a nighttime restriction actually solves. Passenger vehicles are responsible for the other 38% of the fatal crashes on this corridor, and passenger vehicle drivers are not bound by the same informal rules as truckers. The tourists driving from San Antonio to Fredericksburg for the wine and the peach preserves, they drive at night. They drive after dinner, they drive after the second glass of wine that technically puts them under the legal limit and practically puts them in a category that the road has opinions about. The road does not have a sign that says this road is different at night. It has the same 70 miles per hour signs it has in the daytime. It has the same yellow advisory diamonds that say 40 and are not laws. It has the same deer crossing signs that everybody ignores because deer crossing signs are the most ubiquitous and therefore least meaningful piece of road signage in the American landscape. There is a deer crossing sign approximately every 3 miles on this corridor, and in my experience of American roads, the deer have not read them either. What the road does not have is honesty. It does not tell you what it is. It looks like a road and it behaves like a road in the daytime, and it becomes something different at night, something that the people who know it best have decided requires a different set of rules, and those rules are not written anywhere official. The rule that isn't written anywhere, here's what I keep coming back to. The truckers figured this out, not through a study, not through a government initiative, not through a safety campaign with a catchy slogan and a billboard budget. They figured it out the hard way, the way knowledge gets acquired in dangerous professions through loss, and they passed it forward through the informal networks that professionals use when the official channels aren't honest enough to do the job. That is a remarkable thing. An entire class of professionals operating independently across decades arrived at the same conclusion about a specific piece of road and encoded it into their culture. Don't drive it after dark. The simplest possible safety recommendation. It costs nothing. It requires no engineering study, no funding allocation, no political will. It just requires knowing where you are and what that means. The problem is that only some people know. The truckers know, the locals know, the Kimball County Fire volunteers know. Patsy at the convenience store in Junction knows. But the family from Houston who rents a car in San Antonio on a Tuesday in February and decides to drive out to Fredericksburg for the wildflowers and a bed and breakfast with a clawfoot tub, they do not know. They get on US 60 after dark because the GPS says it's the most direct route, and nobody has told them what direct means on this particular road at this particular hour. The sign at the beginning of the corridor doesn't say anything about night. It says US 60. It says the speed limit is 70. It does not say that 47 people died on this road in 20 years, that 62% of them died after dark, that the professionals who drive it for a living have decided collectively it isn't worth it after sunset. That sign, the one that doesn't say those things, is the gap between what this road is and what it presents itself as being. People have been dying in that gap for decades. The truckers close the gap by parking their trucks. They fuel up at Junction or Kerrville. They look at the time, they look at the sky, and if the answer is wrong, they find a lot and they sleep. Bad vending machine food, something on the phone, wait for the sun. It costs them time. And in a profession measured in miles per hour and delivery windows and penalty clauses, time is real money. They pay it anyway. Because the road told them what it costs and they listened. The $62 million was never spent. The deer warning systems were never installed. The studies are filed wherever studies go. And every night, drivers at both ends of this corridor Do the same calculation. Junction to Fredericksburg. What time is it? What's waiting at the other end? Some of them decide no. They wake up to a hill country sunrise that is genuinely spectacular. The ones who decide yes drive into the dark. Most of them make it. The road has been right every time. It's still keeping score.